I walked into my husband's company party, expecting pride, respect, maybe even gratitude. Instead, I caught the whispers first. They floated through the air like poison. There she is, the cold wife, the one who can't satisfy him. The words stung, but I kept my chin high. Then came the final blow. His mistress, his bold, smug little office fling, looked straight at me, lips curling. Security, remove this useless woman. Her voice sliced through the music, humiliating me in front of strangers and supposed friends. I didn't answer. I didn't fight. I turned and walked out, silent, composed, while inside my chest felt like it was burning. On the ride home, I made my decision. Every joint account closed. Every planned trip canceled. And the $17 million stake I held in his company sold, without hesitation. By the time I reached my front door, my phone was vibrating nonstop. 56 missed calls. His name lit up again and again. And then, minutes later, he was pounding on the door himself, desperate. But rewind. Before all of this, before his betrayal tore through me, I was still Mrs. Robert Sterling, co-owner, partner. The security guard at the grand entrance had smiled at me earlier, waving me inside, without checking a thing. He knew who I was. Everyone did. For 15 years, my name was tied to Robert's rise. I was the woman in the background, the one who stayed up until midnight combing through contracts, who hosted dinners that landed million-dollar deals. Every polished handshake he gave was built on the unseen labor I carried. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be ours. The ballroom glittered, dripping with gold and crystal. Chandeliers sparkled above, casting their light over the most powerful people in the city. I spotted the mayor leaning casually at the bar, speaking to the bank president as if the future of the city was just small talk. Nearby, tech moguls circled together, their voices low, trading predictions about the market. This wasn't just another party. This was Robert's night. His coronation. His official induction into the Billionaires Club. I remember smoothing the emerald silk dress I wore, its fabric cool against my skin. Robert had chosen it himself just last week. Green makes your eyes look mysterious, he'd murmured, pressing that distracted kiss on my forehead, the one that had become his routine gesture. Empty. Automatic. At 52, I still turned heads. I still carried the figure and poise that once captivated him, back when I was his paralegal, and he was just a struggling attorney with oversized dreams. I'd believed in him then. I'd built with him. And for years, I thought we were unbreakable. Margaret, darling. Patricia Hoffman, the governor's wife, swept in with her polished smile and air kisses. Her perfume lingered like expensive smoke. Robert must be over the moon tonight. Such an achievement. I smiled back, the trained response slipping easily from my lips. He's worked so hard for this, I said, my eyes already scanning the crowded room for him. And then I added, almost instinctively, we both have. Her smile faltered, just for flicker. Then it returned, brighter, practiced. Of course, dear. You've always been so supportive. Something in her voice tightened around the edges. Something that made me pause just for a heartbeat. But before I could untangle the meaning, she was gone, floating away to the next conversation. I shook off the uneasy feeling. I kept moving, weaving through clusters of familiar faces, nodding, smiling, exchanging empty congratulations. It was all part of the role I had played for years. The perfect partner. The invisible force. The silent strength behind the man being celebrated. But that night was the beginning of my end as Mrs. Robert Sterling, I wove deeper into the party. Something shifted. The air itself felt different, heavy. Conversations faltered when I approached, voices dropping to hushed tones before breaking off altogether. Eyes flicked in my direction, then darted away, quick and guilty. Smiles stretched too wide, too polished, as if pity had replaced sincerity. By the chocolate fountain, I caught Janet Morrison's voice, sharp and careless, sliding through the noise. I just feel so sorry for her. Everyone knows except. Her husband shushed her too late. They both looked up as I stepped closer, their laughter dissolving, faces rearranged into stiff politeness. Janet's words still echoed in my head, unfinished yet complete. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter, sharper. I searched the crowd and finally found him. Robert, my husband, my partner, standing near the stage, framed in light, surrounded by the people who adored him, or at least needed him. Executives, investors, men who owed him favors and fortunes. He looked powerful in his tuxedo, silver hair brushed to perfection, shoulders square, eyes alive with ambition. This was the man I'd once admired, the man I'd believed in. This was his night, and I needed to stand beside him. I moved closer. But as I did, I noticed the subtle shift. The circle of men tightened, shoulders edging closer, backs angled just enough to form a wall. It wasn't obvious, not to anyone else, but to me, it was unmistakable. I was being kept out. Robert's voice rose above the crowd, smooth and commanding, talking about overseas expansion with a confidence that filled the space. He didn't notice me, though I was only a few feet away. "Robert," I said softly, my hand brushing his elbow. He turned. For a fraction of a second I saw it. Not joy. Not warmth. Not recognition. But irritation. A flicker of annoyance, as if my presence was a disruption to his carefully curated evening. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a polite smile, the kind he reserved for strangers who overstayed their welcome. "Oh, Margaret, you're here." His words were flat, emotionless. A formality. No kiss. No hand at my waist. No introductions to the men he'd been pursuing for months. Just distance. I forced a laugh, my voice light, desperate to bridge the crack forming beneath us. "Of course I'm here. This is our big night, remember?" The men around him shifted uneasily. One cleared his throat, murmured something about the bar, and disappeared. Another glanced at his watch, muttered about finding his wife, and followed. Within seconds, the circle dissolved, leaving only Robert and me. He didn't look at me. His eyes scanned the room, restless, already moving on. I should get back to networking. These deals won't close themselves. And just like that, he walked away. No hesitation. No backward glance. I stood alone by the stage, not a wife, not a partner, just a forgotten prop in his carefully staged production. The sting of rejection hit hard, but something else was worse. The awareness. People were watching, whispering, measuring my worth against his indifference. Then I heard it. Clear. Sharp. Deliberate. "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." The words were loud enough to pierce through the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. My skin burned as I turned, trying to locate the voice in the sea of faces. But there was no culprit to confront. Another voice followed, softer but crueler. "Poor thing. She has no idea about Vanessa." The world tilted. Vanessa. The name cut like a blade, twisting everything I thought I knew about the night, about us, about my life. Vanessa. Robert's assistant. That's how it began. The 20-something blonde with ambition in her eyes and a body sculpted to perfection. She'd only been with the company 6 months, yet she'd already woven herself into every corner of his world. Late nights at the office. Weekend meetings. Trips I was suddenly no longer invited to. She was always there, hovering near him, whispering into his ear as though the company couldn't function without her. And I, the wife who had given him 15 years of my life, had chosen not to see it. My hands trembled as the truth pieced itself together like glass shards cutting into skin. The late calls. The excuses. The glow on his face every time his phone buzzed. He had told me it was business. I had believed him. "Margaret, sweetie." Her voice slipped into my ear before I even saw her. Then she was standing beside me, wrapped in a scarlet dress that clung to her youth and arrogance, a dress worth more than most people's rent. Her smile gleamed, sharp and deliberate, a predator circling her prey. "Hello, Vanessa," I said, my voice low, steady only by sheer force of will. She leaned closer, perfume thick and sweet enough to choke. I think there's been a misunderstanding about tonight, she whispered, her tone dripping with condescension. This event is really for business associates and key stakeholders only. I straightened. I am a key stakeholder. I own 17% of this company. Her smirk widened. Had. She corrected softly, savoring the word. Past tense, darling. Robert's been meaning to tell you about a few recent changes. Before I could answer, shadows loomed at my sides. 2 security guards. Men I'd known for years. Men who used to greet me with warmth and respect. Now, their eyes slid past me, cold, detached, as though I were a stranger trespassing in a world I had helped build. Security, Vanessa announced, her voice slicing through the chatter. Remove this useless woman. The ballroom went still. Glasses froze in midair. Every head turned toward me, the spotlight burning, humiliation searing into my skin. I searched for Robert.
Desperate.
Begging without words.
But he didn't look at me.
He didn't even flinch. He kept his back turned, deep in conversation about quarterly projections, as if I had already ceased to exist. The guards' hands were firm yet careful as they guided me away, a cruel courtesy in my expulsion. Each step toward the exit echoed like a verdict. The revolving doors of the hotel spun behind me, sealing my fate. And in that moment, something inside me shattered. My marriage, my identity, my carefully constructed life. All broken, splintered, lying in ruins around me. I walked down the marble stairs like a widow, leaving a gravesite. Except the death wasn't Robert's. It was mine. The woman I had been for 20 years was gone. The valet, the same young man who had greeted me an hour earlier with bright deference, now avoided my eyes. His gaze fell on his clipboard, his posture stiff, his silence a cruel reflection of how invisible I had become. My heels clicked against the pavement, steady and sharp, keeping rhythm with the frantic beating of my heart. Around me, the city pulsed with life. Laughter spilled from bars, couples strolled hand in hand, groups of friends shouted in celebration. Their joy felt foreign, unreachable. I was untethered, floating in a void. I reached into my clutch, fingers brushing against cool velvet. The box. The gift I'd been saving for tonight. My thumb traced the fabric before I opened it. Inside lay a platinum bracelet, sleek and gleaming, engraved with the coordinates of Malibu Beach. The place where Robert had dropped to one knee 23 years ago and asked me to spend forever with him. I had commissioned it months ago, imagining his face when I gave it to him tonight. It was supposed to be a symbol of us, our beginnings, our promises. Now it was a cruel joke, a bitter irony that tasted metallic on my tongue. Excuse me, are you all right? I looked up. A young woman in a server's uniform stood nearby, a cigarette dangling between her fingers, concern softening her features. She had stepped outside for her break, yet her gaze lingered on me, searching. I'm fine, I said, forcing my lips into a smile. It cracked like fragile glass. Just getting some air. She nodded, lit her cigarette, and leaned against the wall, but her eyes didn't leave me. Did I look as broken as I felt? I drew my shoulders back, steadying myself, refusing to collapse under her gaze. I walked toward the parking garage, each step heavier than the last, yet building something new inside me. Not grief. Not weakness. Something sharper. Harder. My Tesla gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, exactly where I had left it. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and let the silence settle over me. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, letting the truth flood in. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to see clearly. The signs had been everywhere. His sudden obsession with fitness. His new contacts, replacing the reading glasses I had always loved on him. Credit card charges from restaurants I had never heard of. The way he showered the moment he got home, scrubbing away proof I had chosen not to question. But the affair itself, that betrayal, wasn't the sharpest pain. It was something else. Something deeper. It wasn't the affair that gutted me the most. It was the erasure. The slow, silent removal of me from the story I had helped create. Every headline called it sterling enterprises. Every glossy article crowned Robert as the genius founder, the visionary, the self-made man. Not one mention of the woman who mortgaged her inheritance to fund his first office lease. Not a single line about the connections I gave him through my family's legal firm. No acknowledgement of the years I bled into contracts while he slept peacefully in the next room. It was as though I had never existed. I unlocked my phone, my hand steady now, scrolling through contacts. My thumb hovered over Robert Home for a long second. Our family attorney. Too early for him. Instead, I tapped on David Chin, financial advisor. He answered quickly, his voice groggy. Margaret, it's past 10. Is everything all right? David, I need you to execute some transactions first thing Monday morning. Can you access my portfolio remotely? Of course. But what's the urgency? We just reviewed your accounts last month. I want to liquidate my stake in Sterling Enterprises. All of it. 17 million. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Margaret, that's a massive move. Maybe we should set a meeting. Talk this through. Monday morning. I cut him off. My voice was calm, cold. I also want every joint account frozen. All credit cards shut down. Anything tied to Robert ends immediately. He hesitated. Are you getting divorced? The word hung between us.
Divorce.
An hour ago, I would have sworn it was impossible. Now it felt like destiny. Just execute the trades, I said. We'll talk tomorrow. I ended the call before he could argue. Next, I found Linda's number, our travel agent. She picked up on the third ring, her voice heavy with sleep. Linda, it's Margaret Sterling. Cancel our trip to Tuscany. Oh no, is everything okay? That's such a special anniversary trip for you and Robert. Anniversary trip. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of loyalty. He had probably planned to take Vanessa in my place, parading her across vineyards and candlelit dinners while I sat at home, blind, still believing in us. Cancel everything, I said. The villa, the flights, the reservations. Every detail. Margaret, the cancellation fees will be steep. Are you sure you don't want to? I'm sure. Send me the paperwork. I hung up before she could protest.
My phone buzzed again.
A text. Unknown number. Mrs. Sterling, this is Jake from Hotel Security. You left your gift box on the front steps. Should I bring it to your car? I froze. My clutch was empty. Somewhere between the revolving doors and the garage, I had dropped Robert's bracelet. The platinum band engraved with the coordinates of Malibu. Our beginning. Our promise. Now abandoned, scattered on concrete like everything else we had built together.
Keep it, I typed back.
Or throw it away. I don't care. But I did care. That was the cruel truth. 23 years of caring. 23 years of bending my life around his dreams, of being the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, the invisible backbone of his empire. That care had become a cage. Tonight, Vanessa had handed me the key. My phone lit up again. Robert's face filled the screen, the photo I'd taken last Christmas. He was laughing at something our daughter had said, eyes crinkled, genuine joy alive in him then. Before Vanessa. Before the lies. Before this hollow version of us. I let the call ring out. It rang again. And again. By the fourth attempt, I started the engine and pulled out of the garage. Let him wonder. Let him explain to his mistress why his wife had disappeared into the night. I drove through the city, headlights gliding across glass towers and empty streets. The route took me past the financial district, where it had all started. Robert's first office had been in a dingy building that now housed a Starbucks. But I could still hear his voice the day he called me after signing that lease. We're going to change everything, Margaret. And we had. Just not in the way I imagined, you and me, Margaret. We're going to build something incredible. I could still hear his voice, full of conviction, full of hope. And he had been right. We had built something incredible. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped being we. It became him, his company, his empire, his name. And I had let it happen. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat, relentless. Call after call. texts lighting up the screen like sparks from a dying fire. I didn't have to read them to know the tone.
Panic.
Pleading. Demands disguised as explanations. By the time I turned into our circular driveway, the counter glared at me. 37 missed calls. I cut the engine and sat in silence, surrounded by steel and shadows in the 4-car garage. All of it, the cars, the house, the life, stood as monuments to the empire I had helped build, the empire he had claimed as his alone. Tomorrow, I would start dividing it. Tonight, I would lie in our bed one last time as Mrs. Robert Sterling. The woman who walked into that ballroom hours ago had been naive, broken, blind. The woman sitting in this car was no longer her. She was something else entirely. I woke at 5:30, muscle memory guiding me before thought. For a decade, it had been my ritual. The bed beside me was empty, but that was nothing new. Robert never stirred before 7. Yet now his absence felt different, permanent. A void, not a delay. In the kitchen, the grinder hummed and hissed, filling the silence with its mechanical rhythm. I wrapped my hands around the mug, the heat grounding me. The house was still, pristine, but it no longer felt like a home. I carried my coffee into my office, unchanged yet transformed. The mahogany desk Robert had gifted me on our 10th anniversary gleamed under the morning light. Behind me, rows of filing cabinets lined the wall, decades of records, neatly organized, a monument to the order I had imposed on chaos. For years, those files had been my private pride, proof of my diligence. Today, they became ammunition. I pulled the first drawer open. The incorporation papers of Sterling Enterprises, 1998. My signature etched beside his.
Co-founder.
Initial investor. Proof that the empire had not begun with Robert alone. It had begun with us. With me. Funny how history could be scrubbed clean with a press release. I photographed each page, slow and deliberate, turning paper into evidence. Next, the loan documents from 2001. Robert had needed capital to expand. My family's law firm had opened doors, but the ink that mattered was mine. My signature as guarantor for $3 million. My personal assets on the line, not his. Another photo, another piece of truth. By 8 o'clock, I had documented 15 years of contributions erased from Sterling Enterprises' official narrative. My grandmother's inheritance, used for his first major acquisition. The second mortgage on our home to cover payroll during the recession of 2008. The countless clients who came through my network, filling his books, fueling his rise. Every file I touched, every page I photographed, was a reminder. Robert had never been the lone visionary. He had been propped up, protected, carried by me. My phone buzzed. David Chen's name flashed across the screen. I answered. Margaret, I've been trying to reach you since 6. The market opens in 30 minutes. I need verbal confirmation for the trades.
You have it, I said.
My voice didn't waver. Execute everything we discussed. He hesitated. Sterling Enterprises stock has already dropped 2% in pre-market. I closed the file in front of me, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Then let it drop. Words getting out. There's chatter about major shareholder shifts. Margaret, are you absolutely certain about this? David's voice carried both caution and disbelief. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I answered. My tone was steady, unshakable. All right, he said after a pause. Give me 2 hours. It'll be done. I ended the call and opened my laptop. The legal notice I had written at 3 in the morning glowed on the screen. The language was clinical, almost surgical. No sentiment. No apology.
Just facts.
Margaret Elizabeth Sterling hereby notifies the board of directors of Sterling Enterprises of the immediate liquidation of her 17% ownership stake and the termination of all joint financial obligations. My finger hovered over the send button. 1 second.
2.
3. Then I pressed it. Just like that, the email vanished into the ether, carrying with it the death blow to everything Robert believed he controlled. 30 seconds later, the storm hit. The phone erupted. His name lit up the screen again and again. I let it ring. Straight to voicemail. Another call. Then another. By the fourth missed call, I found myself savoring the silence between rings. Each unanswered buzz felt like a declaration. A small, sharp victory. My own pulse of freedom. The text followed. Margaret, what the hell did you do?
Call me back.
Immediately.
Delete.
This is insane. You can't just destroy everything we built because you're having some kind of breakdown.
Delete.
The board is in emergency session. You've triggered a crisis.
Call me. Delete.
I poured myself another coffee, the bitter scent filling the air like armor. Then I returned to the filing cabinets. Pages that once symbolized partnership now revealed betrayal. 5 years ago, Robert had insisted on renegotiating the partnership agreements. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. Now, under this new light, it was obvious. He'd been preparing for this, reducing my official role while increasing my liability. But Robert had overlooked one fatal detail. He had never removed my name from the original incorporation documents. On paper, in the eyes of the law, I was still a founding partner. Equal authority. Equal rights. The phone buzzed again, this time with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Sterling, this is Vanessa. I hope you're feeling better this morning. Perhaps we could have coffee and discuss last night's misunderstanding. I froze, staring at the screen. The audacity. The woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation now wrote, as though we were friends smoothing over a trivial spat. I typed back. There was no misunderstanding.
And it's Ms. Hartford now.
I'm reclaiming my maiden name. Her response was instant. Let's not be hasty. Robert is very upset. I think we can work out something that benefits everyone. Benefits everyone. As if I were nothing more than a messy detail in their perfect little arrangement. As if betrayal could be negotiated away. I snapped a screenshot and filed it with the growing archive of evidence. Then the landline rang. Almost no one had that number, which meant it could only be family. I lifted the receiver. Margaret Elizabeth, what in God's name is happening? My sister Sarah's voice, tight and urgent, filled the room. Robert just called me in tears. He says you've lost your mind. I closed my eyes for a beat.
No, Sara.
I've finally found it. For the first time in years. He says you're destroying his company out of spite. That you're unraveling. That you're making decisions you'll regret. Her words hung in the air. But instead of doubt, they lit a fire. I walked to the window overlooking the garden, the only part of this house that ever truly belonged to me. Robert had never cared for it. Never noticed the hours I spent bent over the soil, hands stained with earth, coaxing roses into bloom. Now they stood tall and radiant, more alive than our marriage had ever been. Sarah, I said into the phone, my voice low but clear, did you know I've poured over $20 million into Robert's so-called success? And that doesn't even count my time, my connections, or the years of unpaid labor. She hesitated. Well, that's what marriage is. I didn't let her finish. Did you also know he's been sleeping with his assistant? That she humiliated me in front of 200 people last night. Silence. I'm not having a breakdown, Sarah. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference. When I hung up, the house exhaled with me. Quiet.
Still.
Peaceful. For the first time in years, silence felt like an ally. I returned to my desk, opened a blank document, and began building my arsenal. If Robert wanted to spin a story as the victim, I had 23 years of records that told a different truth. My phone lit up with 56 missed calls, but the sound had become nothing more than static. Every unanswered ring peeled away another layer of the woman I'd once been. The woman who bowed her head and played her part. She was gone. In her place sat someone Robert had never met. Someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Someone unafraid to collect. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom loomed with its intimidating floor-to-ceiling windows and the long mahogany table that had cowed so many visitors.
But not me. Not today.
I arrived 30 minutes early, laying my documents across the glossy surface like a general preparing for war. One by one, the board members filed in. Men I'd known for decades, Men who had shared toasts in my dining room and sat at my table, now unable to meet my eyes. James Morrison, our CFO, gave me a small, hesitant nod. Patricia Webb from legal looked pale, her mind already spinning with the consequences. Then the doors slammed open. Robert stormed in, a shadow of the man he once projected to be. His silver hair was wild, his tie crooked, his eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. The authority he carried so easily yesterday had dissolved overnight. Vanessa trailed behind him in a blood-red suit, trying to project power. But her stance betrayed her. Arms crossed too tight, shoulders stiff, eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an escape. Margaret. His voice cracked when he said my name. What have you done? I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands with calm precision. Good morning, Robert. Gentlemen. Patricia. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Don't you dare play games with me. He slammed his palm against the table. Several board members flinched. You've triggered a financial meltdown. The stock is in freefall, clients are panicking, the bank wants answers for frozen accounts. Do you understand what you've done? James Morrison cleared his throat. Margaret, perhaps we could discuss a more gradual transition. There is nothing to discuss, I said, my tone razor-sharp. I've liquidated my position in accordance with the bylaws. Every action was legal, every step proper. Robert began pacing, a predator with nowhere to strike. You've destroyed everything. 23 years of work. Gone because you've lost your mind. The words hung heavy. I watched the room shift uncomfortably. They expected me to collapse, to cry, to fit his story of the irrational wife unraveling under pressure. Instead, I opened my folder.
Calm.
Controlled.
Precise.
This, I said, laying down the first paper, is the original incorporation filing from 1998. You'll see my name listed as co-founder and primary investor. Funny how that detail never appeared in your press interviews. Robert froze. His face drained of color. That was just a formality. I laid down the next document. Here's the loan guarantee I signed in 2001. $3 million to acquire Morrison Industries. My personal assets secured that expansion. Not yours. Vanessa's arms fell from their defensive cross. She leaned forward now, her eyes locked on me. And this, I continued, stacking a thick pile onto the table, is documentation of every financial contribution I've made over the past 2 decades. $27 million in direct investments. Not including the value of my network, my clients, my strategic guidance. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning was suddenly deafening. Robert's face shifted from rage to shock, red fading to a lifeless gray. Margaret, Patricia Webb spoke carefully, as if choosing every word might determine her own survival. What exactly are you proposing? I didn't blink. I'm not proposing.
I'm informing.
As of this morning, I've liquidated every share I held in Sterling Enterprises. The company will need immediate restructuring if it hopes to stay solvent. You can't just, Robert started, but I cut him off mid-breath. I can, and I have. What I built, I can dismantle. For the first time since entering the room, I turned my gaze fully on Vanessa. She shrank under it. Gone was the woman who'd paraded her power at that party, who'd laughed at my expense in front of 200 witnesses. Now, stripped of her illusions, she was just a frightened woman clinging to the edges of someone else's empire. Her expensive lipstick couldn't mask the tremor in her jaw, the fear that flickered in her eyes as she understood exactly what my actions meant. Of course, I continued, still holding her in my stare, the company might recover. If new leadership is installed, someone untainted by scandal, someone who can rebuild credibility. Robert followed my line of sight, and the truth crashed into him. His face contorted as realization spread. You're destroying everything to get back at me for. For what, Robert? I rose slowly, each movement deliberate, my voice carrying across the room like steel on glass. For the affair? For the humiliation? For erasing me from the very history I helped you write? The room seemed to tighten around us. My documents in hand, I stood tall. This isn't revenge. This is business. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. James Morrison scribbled notes with frantic energy, probably calculating how to shield himself. Patricia looked like she was already rehearsing her resignation. Robert collapsed into his chair, the fight draining out of him. "What do you want?" he whispered. "What I've always wanted," I said simply. "Recognition for my work. Respect for my intelligence. Since you've proven incapable of giving either, I've decided to grant them to myself." "The board will never accept this," he said weakly. "The board doesn't have a choice. Unless you can raise $27 million by close of business tomorrow, Sterling Enterprises collapses." I moved toward the door, then paused. "I suggest you call an emergency shareholder meeting. Discuss new leadership." Robert's voice cracked behind me. "I'm stepping down as CEO." The words ricocheted through the boardroom like a bullet. Gasps echoed. Vanessa went pale, her golden ticket evaporating before her eyes. I turned back. For a flicker of a moment, I saw him as he once was, the ambitious young lawyer I'd fallen for.
Brilliant.
Driven, but ultimately fragile when faced with real consequences. "That's wise," I said evenly. "I'll have my attorney prepare the divorce paperwork. Once you've secured the company's future, we can address our personal assets." I left the boardroom different than I'd entered. Behind me, frantic whispers filled the air. Patricia's pen scratched furiously. Vanessa's heels clattered against the marble as she chased after Robert, already calculating her next move. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft ding, sealing them inside their panic. For the first time in decades, I smiled. 23 years of being unseen had taught me the art of invisibility. But now, I understood something far more powerful, how visible I could become when I chose to step into the light. The elevator carried me downward, away from a life I'd built, endured, and finally destroyed. When the doors opened into the dim hush of the parking garage, it felt like crossing into another world, one where I set the rules, where no one could script my role for me again. My phone buzzed relentlessly during the drive home. Robert's name pulsed across the screen, desperate, insistent, pathetic. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the counter showed 43 missed calls. I powered it off. Silence was the only sound I wanted. Inside, I paused in the hallway. Our wedding photos lined the walls, relics from a life that no longer belonged to me. The kitchen, once alive with forced laughter and dinner parties for Robert's clients, felt cavernous, like a stage stripped bare after the curtain falls. Even the bedroom, with its pristine California king bed, looked like a museum exhibit, a shrine to a couple that no longer existed. I walked straight to my office, my heart steady, my hands sure. I pulled out the manila folder I had prepared weeks ago, but never dared touch. Inside, the divorce papers sat waiting, crisp and untouched. At the top of the first page, the words stared back at me like a declaration of freedom. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Margaret Elizabeth Sterling versus. And I didn't flinch. Robert James Sterling. The name looked foreign now, though it had been my anchor for 23 years. My hand trembled as I pressed the pen to paper, the weight of the moment heavy in my chest. But then I wrote it, my name. Not his shadow. Not his extension. Margaret E. Hartford. My maiden name. My real name. Seeing it inked across the page was like slipping into clothes that had been waiting in the back of my closet for decades, soft, familiar, fitting in a way I hadn't remembered possible. I signed again, then again. Each signature steadier than the last. By the final page, my hand didn't shake. My breath didn't falter. My resolve had crystallized into something unbreakable. I slid the papers into the pre-addressed envelope, sealed it, placed it in the outgoing mail basket with the same finality as placing a stone on a grave. Tomorrow, a process server would walk into Robert's office and hand him the envelope that ended everything. Not with screaming, not with drama, with ink, paper, and the law. And instead of grief, what washed over me was relief. For the first time in decades, my mind wasn't filled with his noise. I wasn't calculating what Robert might want for dinner, or rehearsing small talk for some client event, or carrying the weight of his ambitions. That mental real estate, the one I had rented out to his dreams, suddenly belonged entirely to me. That night, I slept deeply.
No tossing, no endless circling thoughts.
Just silence. And in that silence, I found rest. The weeks that followed blurred into endless stacks of legal paperwork, strategy meetings, and careful negotiations. But alongside the exhaustion came something else, something I hadn't tasted in years.
Excitement.
A hum beneath my skin that whispered, "Your life is finally your own." Rebecca Martinez, my attorney, became more than legal counsel. She became my therapist, my sounding board, my unexpected ally in rebuilding myself. "Your financial documentation is immaculate," she told me one afternoon, flipping through binder after binder of records I'd meticulously kept. "Most clients can't prove half of what they contributed to the marital estate. But you, Margaret, you've built an iron wall of evidence." I gave a small smile.
I've always been organized.
Robert hated it, said it made me rigid. "Well," Rebecca said, tapping a page, "that rigidity is about to save you millions. His attorney's pushing for a 50-50 split, but based on these records, you're entitled to far more." Her words didn't just promise financial security. They validated something deeper. I hadn't imagined my contributions. I hadn't fabricated my value. It was there, black and white, undeniable. In the spaces between meetings, I rediscovered myself. I enrolled in a photography class, something I'd loved in college, long before Robert dismissed it as impractical. My instructor, Elena, a retired National Geographic photographer with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, studied my first assignment. "You have a good eye," she said finally. "You see stories others overlook." Her words landed heavier than she knew. Because I had always seen stories, hidden in Robert's deals, tucked between the lines of contracts, whispered in the corners of corporate parties. But I had never considered my perspective as something worth sharing on its own. Now, someone was telling me it was not only valid but valuable. One afternoon, Sarah came by. My sister. Always blunt. Always skeptical. She settled into my kitchen with her coffee, her eyes scanning me like a doctor searching for signs of illness. "You seem different," she said finally. I smiled. "I feel different. Lighter." "Robert says you're ignoring his calls.
He's worried about you."
I looked at her over my mug. "Sarah, when was the last time we sat here and talked about me? Not Robert. Not his business. Not his endless problems. Just me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. She couldn't remember. "Exactly," I said quietly. "Even now you're here because of him, not because you wanted to see me." Her face flushed. "That's not fair." "It's perfectly fair. But it isn't your fault. I taught everyone in my life to see me as Robert's wife first, Margaret second. But that woman doesn't exist anymore." And saying it out loud, I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. 3 months later, I made my first business investment as a single woman. A sustainable fashion startup led by 2 young designers, wildly ambitious, brilliant, convinced they could reshape the world. They reminded me of Robert and me 25 years ago, when we were still hungry and untarnished. "Why fashion?" Rebecca asked when I told her. "Because they're building something beautiful without exploiting anyone," I said. "And because I need to prove to myself that I can spot talent and nurture it without anyone else's permission." The investment felt terrifying, like stepping off a cliff, but also exhilarating, like learning how to fly. 6 months later, I was leaving a gallery opening. My photography, my work, had been featured in a group exhibition. My heart was still buzzing with adrenaline when I saw him. Robert. Standing near the entrance. Older. Smaller. His edges dulled. His presence diminished. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I didn't feel anything at all. Our eyes locked across the crowded gallery, and for the briefest moment the noise, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it fell away. Time froze. Just me. Just him. The man who had once been my whole world, now reduced to a shadow from my past. Robert moved toward me slowly, his steps careful, almost hesitant, as though I might vanish if he came too quickly. His voice cracked with an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Margaret, you look," he faltered, searching for words that had always come so easily to him. "You look happy." I let him see the truth in my face. "I am happy, Robert. Genuinely happy." He shifted, awkward in a way I had never seen before. "I've heard about your photography. And the business investment. You're doing well." "I'm doing what I should have been doing all along," I said. "Living my own life." His eyes softened, regret carving deeper into the lines of his face. The weight of years hung between us.
I'm sorry.
For everything. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I needed you to know. I held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave the simplest answer. "Thank you for saying that. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." And with that, I walked past him. I could feel his eyes trailing me, clinging to me, but I didn't look back. Outside, the night air was crisp, the kind of chill that hints at autumn's arrival. The city lights shimmered like scattered stars, but my heart was already elsewhere. I had dinner plans with Elena and her husband, and afterward, a weekend trip to photograph the rugged California coast. A life entirely of my own design. For the first time in 23 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The next morning, the coastal highway stretched out before me, a silver ribbon twisting against the deep blue of the Pacific. My camera gear sat secure in the passenger seat of my Tesla Model S, midnight blue. My favorite color, a shade Robert once dismissed as too flashy. But this car, like everything else in my life now, was mine. Paid for in my own name, with my own money. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling golden light across the water. My reflection in the rearview mirror was no longer the woman who'd been escorted out of that ballroom in humiliation a year ago. My hair, streaked with silver I no longer bothered to hide, caught the wind from the open sunroof. My wardrobe, once carefully curated to complement Robert's image, was now mine alone. Simple jeans, a cashmere sweater in a color I loved, chosen for no other reason than it made me feel alive. My phone buzzed with a message from Elena. "Exhibition opens in 2 hours. Still can't believe they're featuring 8 of your pieces."
8.
8 photographs that had grown out of my pain, my survival, my rebirth. The Meridian Gallery show was more than an exhibition. It was a declaration. My voice mattered. Critics had called my photographs raw, intimate, quietly powerful. They were portraits of women standing at the edge of their own reinventions, piecing themselves back together after devastation. Ironic, really, because those images weren't just theirs. They were mine too. Every frame was a mirror of my own journey. I reached my favorite cliffside overlook, the place where the land gave way to endless ocean. Muscle memory took over as I set up my tripod. The sharp crash of waves against jagged rocks. Seabirds carving circles in the wind. The horizon stretching infinitely forward, promising adventures not yet imagined. I thought about yesterday's call with my financial advisor. Hartford Ventures, the firm I'd founded just 6 months ago, had already closed its 3rd successful deal. The sustainable fashion startup I'd believed in had surpassed every projection. 2 other companies in my portfolio were thriving. Rebecca's words echoed in my memory. "You have an instinct for identifying potential. Entrepreneurs trust you because you know what it feels like to rebuild from nothing." Through the viewfinder, I saw the perfect composition. The ocean, restless and eternal. The cliffs, jagged and unyielding. The light, shifting but resilient. Just like me. I adjusted the settings, pressed the shutter, and captured the moment. That frame, I knew, would live in the book I was now preparing. Resilience. Portraits of women reclaimed. 3 publishers had already shown interest. I packed my equipment carefully, the Pacific wind tugging at my sweater as though urging me forward. Then my phone rang, and in that instant, I knew the next chapter of my story was about to begin. Sarah's name lit up my screen, and for the first time in years, I answered her call with genuine warmth instead of obligation. "Margaret." Her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard in decades. "I just wanted to wish you luck tonight. I know how much this exhibition means to you. Thank you, I said, smiling to myself. Are you still planning to drive down? Wouldn't miss it, she replied. Then after a pause, her voice wavered. And Margaret, I owe you an apology. You were right. I'd grown used to seeing you only as Robert's wife. But this past year, getting to know you as just my sister, it's been a gift. Her honesty pierced me in a way I hadn't expected. After we hung up, I drove toward the city with a lightness in my chest that felt almost like flight. The radio played Vivaldi's Four Seasons. I caught myself humming along, something I never would have dared with Robert in the passenger seat. He always demanded silence, as though music stole space from his thoughts. But tonight, the notes filled my car, filling me too, and I welcomed every measure. By the time I reached the gallery, the building buzzed with energy. Anticipation crackled in the air. My work, my photographs, covered an entire wall. Black and white portraits, each one a window into survival, transformation, and self-discovery. Every face held a story. Every story, a piece of me. These are extraordinary, James Whitfield, the gallery owner, murmured as he adjusted the lighting. His eyes lingered on one image. The way you've captured not just their faces, but their spirits. This is powerful work. The opening reception swelled beyond anything I had imagined. Collectors, critics, strangers curious enough to step inside, and then stay. Their conversations hummed beneath my photographs like an undercurrent of reverence. I moved through the crowd, no longer invisible, no longer the quiet shadow I once was. My voice carried. My opinions landed. My presence held weight. Excuse me, are you the photographer? I turned to find a young woman in her 30s. Her eyes glistened with something raw, recognition. I am, I said. Margaret Hartford. She gestured toward a portrait on the wall, a woman in her 60s, tear-streaked, but laughing with unrestrained joy. Your work speaks to me. I'm going through a divorce right now, and seeing this, it gives me hope. Hope that maybe there's happiness waiting on the other side. There is, I told her. Different maybe, but real. More real than you can imagine. Her smile trembled, but it was there. And in that moment, I understood what my art had become. A bridge. My story woven into theirs. The evening unfolded like a dream. Conversations shifted from art to philosophy to the delicate dance between resilience and reinvention. For the first time in decades, people weren't looking past me, they were looking to me. Not because of my husband's title, not because of his company, but because of me. Toward the end of the night, Elena appeared with a champagne flute, her eyes gleaming. 3 red dots, she announced, nodding toward my wall. Sold. And more. 2 collectors whispered about commissioning portraits. I accepted the glass and let the room blur for a moment. My name in print. My work on the walls. My voice respected. And most of all, myself whole, visible, unapologetically alive. Later, back in my home office, no longer our office but mine, I scrolled through emails from potential clients and publishers. Beyond the window, the city lights sparkled, a constellation of possibility. And somewhere out there, I imagined Robert hunched in his office, still chasing the validation that had always slipped through his grasp. I shut my laptop and stepped out onto my balcony. The night air wrapped around me, cool and bracing. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more victories, more proof that a woman's worth is never measured by how well she disappears into someone else's life. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. Saw the article about your exhibition. Congratulations. You deserve all the success coming your way. Signed, simply V. Vanessa. I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without hesitation. Some doors remain closed. Some chapters stay buried. I lifted my face toward the stars, breathing in their quiet promise. And I smiled. Not for Robert, not for Sarah, not for anyone else. For me. At last, I was exactly who I was meant to be. Successful. Independent. Visible. Free.